Okay, so please join me in welcoming our panelists. I first want to introduce our director at Kahuliʻao and distinguished professor, premier legal scholar in Hawaii and Hawaii, Professor Kapua Sproat. Kapua is a professor of law at the University of Hawaii William S. Richardson School of Law and the director of Kahuliʻao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. Kahuliʻao is an academic center that promotes education, scholarship, community outreach, and collaboration on issues of law, culture, and justice for Native Hawaiians and other Pacific and indigenous peoples. Kapua also co-directs the law school's Native Hawaiian Rights Clinic and teaches courses in Native Hawaiian and environmental law and legal writing. For years now, Kahuliʻao's clinics have been providing direct legal services to communities across Hawaii, seeking to more proactively manage their natural and cultural resources, including those living in the wake of climate disasters, such as the 2018 floods on Kauai and the 2023 Maui wildfires. How about a hand for Professor Sproat? Our second panelist is Rayna Ramolete Hayashi. Rayna is the Aloha ʻāina program manager at the Trust for Public Land, where she protects lands that perpetuate Hawaiian culture and resources, governance and stewardship to Native Hawaiian organizations. Since joining the Trust for Public Land in 2019, Rayna has worked to protect and to return over 5,000 acres of land and 9 special wahipana across Hawaii. Rayna works in partnership with communities to help them plan vision for the land's future, engage in grassroots advocacy, navigate complex public funding processes and real estate due diligence, and grow capacity for community-based land ownership. Born and raised in Kapalama, Oahu, she graduated from Wanalua High School, the University of British Columbia, and Seattle University School of Law. How about a hand for Rayna? Trust for Public Land helped us to get some of our ancestral ʻāina back, so I know them really well, mahalo their work. And our last panelist is Ness. She's the executive director of Lahaina Community Land Trust, where they are building a rapidly growing, community-owned and governed land base with the goal to permanently protect 20% of Lahaina's residential real estate from speculator interest and build an inventory of residential, commercial, and cultural lands, restoring and caring for Lahaina's ʻāina and ʻea. A settler to Hawaii, displaced from Japan after the tsunami and nuclear meltdown, she has intimate experience with the influx of outside wealth and displacement that unfolds after disaster. She previously served as a senior affordable housing policy advisor for Council Member Johnson and is also the founder of the Maui Food Hub, a response to COVID that has now become a vital and permanent farm-to-consumer infrastructure. How about a hand for Autumn? And our moderator is from our Poʻaikelohaina lab. She's almost done with her PhD. So proud of all her work. Mahina Tutor. Mahina is from Koʻolaupoko, Oahu. She is currently pursuing a PhD in Indigenous Politics at UH Manoa. She's a graduate of William S. Richardson School of Law with certificates in environmental and Native Hawaiian law. She has worked on several nonprofit, state, and federal agencies working to protect our precious natural and cultural resources, and she has served on the State Environmental Advisory Council. In addition to her work in the Poʻaikelohaina Research Lab, Mahina worked for several years at Kahuliʻao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. She's an author of numerous things, and an honor to have Mahina join us. So can everyone come up, please?
Okay, aloha mai kākou. Aloha. Please join me again in welcoming our esteemed panelists. Okay, I'm very excited for our conversation today. So what we're going to start with is a little bit of context, and then we're going to get right into it. So what you heard earlier from Kumukamana, and then what Uncle Neil and the panel on the e-trust discussed, to me is part of a much longer arc. Hawaiians and their allies have always experimented with how to hold land together, how to protect it from commodification in the face of legal, economic, and political pressure. From the time of the Mahele to the land hui movement of the 1850s onward, to the Waiahole Waikane anti-eviction protests of the 1970s and beyond, communities have been coming together, both formally and informally, pooling resources and trying to prevent the loss or alienation of our lands and waters. So they understood the tools of American property law and used them deliberately in service of Hawaiian values. So the organizational vehicles we'll be talking about today, here in this panel, are the contemporary inheritors of that instinct, that ʻāina belongs to community and not to capital, and that there have always been people willing to fight to keep it that way. So our roadmap for today's panel, Kapua trained me well on roadmaps. First, we're going to ground ourselves in the tools, the legal mechanisms that communities are using right now to acquire and protect ʻāina. Then we're going to be getting into the kind of harder questions, the tensions between operating within the American property law system, while also honoring a worldview that was never reducible to ownership. And then we'll close by asking what restoration actually means. Not just returning title, but returning water, relationships, and the capacity to govern ʻāina on Hawaiian terms. So with that, let's just get right into the tools. And we're going to talk about what each of these wonderful wahine are working on throughout this process. So first, for Rayna, the first question I have is that the phrase ʻāinahoʻi, which we're talking about today, can mean many things legally. Can you walk us kind of through the main property law mechanisms available for communities, including leases, fee simple acquisition, conservation easements, and deed restrictions? What kinds of community goals do each of those serve, and what are the limits of each? Super easy question to start with.
Hello? Yeah, how much time do we have? Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kamana, for organizing this, and just it's surreal to be on a panel with these incredible wahine sitting alongside me, and you know, I think to step a little bit back from the question, ʻāinahoʻi, right? Like everyone's talked about, is a whole range. It's really an ecosystem of all kinds of things that all kinds of people are doing to return land and to return to land. And the Trust for Public Land, we're a national nonprofit. The easiest way I can describe what we do is conservation real estate. We have a long history in Hawaii, thanks to the leadership of Leah Hong and so many others. But you know, Uncle Emmett Aluli, he was a founder of one of our programs, which is our Aloha ʻāina program. And it's really about buying and protecting land that is often threatened with sale or development. A lot of times these opportunities come to us because communities have already, for decades, for generations, have engaged in different forms of ʻāinahoʻi, of trying to protect these lands. And because of their activism and their advocacy, these opportunities, TPL gets pulled in to help. We are really an intermediary. We help to negotiate with willing sellers, so it's voluntary, voluntary conservation. You need a willing seller. You need a community that's organized, that has an entity that's ready to accept title to land. You need ʻāina that is rich in cultural, natural, ecological resources, and you need a ton of money. And Trust for Public Land has helped to organize a lot of these pools of funding. We're probably I think we're the only state that has conservation funds in every single county, thanks to the early work of TPL. A portion of property taxes goes into these funds, and groups can apply for the money to help buy and protect ʻāina. We also have a state fund that does that. So those are kind of like the basic elements of what I'm talking about when we talk about conservation real estate. To answer your question, so there's fee simple acquisition, right? That's basically where you buy all rights, title, interest, ownership in land. That can happen through an exchange of money. It can happen through a donation of land from a landowner. And then there's conservation easements, which are basically a legal agreement, a voluntary legal agreement between a landowner and either a land trust, a nonprofit land trust, or a government agency that is an agreement to restrict land and its uses. And typically it needs to serve a public purpose, right? To protect cultural and historical sites, to protect agriculture, to protect clean water, protect native habitat. And so it's an agreement to basically remove development rights from a property that has a monetary value in Western property law, and protect the land for those values. A conservation easement holder monitors and enforces those restrictions. I think, the question about what are the limits, what are the possibilities of using these tools? So, I think both deed restrictions, right? A deed restriction is very similar. It's something that goes in the deed where you agree to restrict ʻāina for certain purposes. And those restrictions are permanent, whether it's in a deed or a conservation easement. In perpetuity, what are you saying this land should be used for? And so really it is an opportunity for communities to come together and decide. And kind of the way I think about it is like Kapua, that concept, like trying to take that and have communities vision like 100, 800 years from now, like what is the appropriate use of this particular ʻāina? And the only people that can answer that question are people who are intimately familiar with ʻāina and its resources and what it should be used for. So conservation easements and deed restrictions can absolutely say, this ʻāina should be used for lo'i, for loko i'a, for watershed protection, for traditional agroforestry in perpetuity, which means that even if the land is bought or sold, let's say a Native Hawaiian nonprofit for whatever reason folds, that those restrictions run with the land. So whomever that land falls into the hands of is subject to that vision that is initially crafted, right, between all of the parties that negotiate it. So there's lots of opportunity to exercise sovereignty, to exercise a vision that incorporates Hawaiian values and worldview. But there's also lots of limitations, right? You either a county or a state or someone else like a land trust will monitor that conservation easement to make sure you're following those restrictions. So you're giving up some level of I guess, decision-making in that way. But if you craft a CE from the beginning with all of these things in mind, if it's done really well, there shouldn't be any problems in terms of you following those restrictions, right? There's appraisal issues that we can go into, but I'll stop there.
Well, mahalo for that. That was a perfect intro. And building off of that, I'd like to turn it over to Autumn. So most people know about the devastation of the Lahaina fires, but fewer know what came after, the organizing, the vision, the decision to build a community land trust. So can you tell us about the founding of Lahaina Community Land Trust? What was the impetus? What were some of your hardest early decisions? And how did you decide on which of those mechanisms that Rayna talked about to deploy in your work?
Sure, thanks for that warm-up. I just want to call out that the Lahaina Community Land Trust is new. It was like the idea for the land trust was birthed on my tailgate on around about August 13th, so like 5 days after the fire. But the relational infrastructure that allowed for this to actually be a real thing has been building for generations. And the reason it's working is because the people who built this organization are like, they trust each other with their lives. They're trusted by funders. They're trusted by policymakers. They're trusted by the wider community. So I just need to call that out. We didn't just have this cockamamie idea and make it happen. Like, everybody had to be in. So that said, it was in my intro, it was noted that I came to this place because of the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. So when I arrived in Hawaii as a settler, I already had some really intimate understandings of what happens when you separate large amounts of people with generational knowledge from land, when you separate them. Like, tsunami, all that stuff aside, there are fewer fish in the sea today in northern Japan in my family's fishing village because corporate fishing interests bought those families out after the tsunami. I could go on for days, but there's a lot of ways that affects everything. And so when I came to Hawaii, I started working with folks in Lahaina on land and housing and water justice way pre-fire. When the fire happened, you folks probably remember, it ignited this generational trauma that exists here about, oh my God, they're coming for the land now. And people who now are on our board and our staff of the Land Trust, before they even had underwear or knew that their loved ones were alive, we were already thinking about generations' future, like how are we gonna protect the land? So we decided to build a land trust. When the community, this is like days after the fire, when the community really understood that it's possible for us to own land collectively, it was really cool to watch that idea take off. And we started talking about housing, and then really quickly the community was like, why are we stopping at housing? Let's buy it all back. If you think about every problem that exists across the ʻāina, it is rooted in landowners that look at their land as an investment, an income generator, and a government, county, state, and federal that is beholden to private property interests. So let's just remove that. Let's just buy them out. Let's become the landowner. And it went from, if we can save one piece of ʻāina from this disaster-driven sale to investor pipeline that exists, then we've done our job, to a goal to protect 20% of Lahaina. And right now we're in escrow for our 21st residential property. Yeah, thank you. We got a lot of work to do. And those are parcels that we bought outright, like the title says Lahaina Community Land Trust. We also have protected another 8 parcels and counting through the deed restriction that Rayna talked about. This is families that we're gonna have to sell because they didn't have enough money to rebuild. So we stepped in and invested in them being able to stay. So they get to keep title to their land. And then they sign a deed restriction that has the same exact rules as ʻāina that we own, but they keep title to it. And then we've intervened on 3 foreclosures. And this is like the thing I am so proud of, you guys. These industries are created to separate Kānaka from ʻāina. The end result of all of this is separation. Foreclosure is another one. We bought out 3 families that were in active foreclosure. Like, their land was on the way to the auction block, you know. With their blessing, we worked with them to buy the land from them, and then we wrote their family into the purchase and sale document. They have legal rights to be the first person to buy the house on top. So technically, the land title says Lahaina Community Land Trust, but the family owns the house and they have rights to it for as long as their family continues. So just lots of different tools that we're getting creative, but the end goal is that once the Lahaina Community Land Trust touches a piece of land, it will never be available to a speculator again. it only appreciates at 1.5% a year forever and ever and ever. And when it sells, it has to be sold either through the land trust to another Lahaina buyer or a Lahaina buyer. We can talk about how to find that later if there's interest.
That's awesome. Okay, so for Kapua now. So you are here today in your capacity as the director of Kahuliʻao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law and the Native Hawaiian Rights Clinic, which has done amazing work over many, many years for communities across the Paʻāina. So can you share a bit about the work you're currently working on in partnership with community?
Mahalo mahina, aloha mai kākou. And I really want to mahalo po'ai ke ʻāina and Kamana in particular for these important conversations that we're having today and the opportunity to really plan for what comes next, because there is so much that needs to happen. So I'm with Kahuliʻao. That's your university's Native Hawaiian Law Center. As Kamana explained before, we're an academic center that promotes education, scholarship, community outreach, and collaboration on issues of law, culture, and justice, not just for Kānaka, but for other Pacific and Indigenous people as well. And a big part of how we do that work is through our Native Hawaiian Rights Clinic, which is actually a class that's taught at the law school, where we have amazing post-JD fellows like Ka'ululu'uai and Kawai Scanlon, who are here sitting quietly in the corner with some of our students here from the clinic. But our post-JD fellows teach a class that enables our second and third year law students to practicing law. So they have opportunities to provide direct legal services largely to our rural communities with the greatest needs. So we provide free legal services, they get incredible training, and it's a great way that we leverage resources. And I do want to mahalo OHA and Chair Kahele in particular, because it's really through their support that we're able to have our post-JD fellows that help to provide these important services. So we have been honored to work across our Paʻāina on a whole range of things. I joke that we provide the best free legal services because there aren't a whole lot of free legal services in natural and cultural resource management issues. So we've been honored to partner with communities on traditional and customary rights work, on Molokaʻi, on marine sanctuary work, in Hawaiʻi Island, and so many other things. To be quite honest, we do a lot of water work because we have expertise in that area. So everything from looking at inter midstream flow standards, which are the minimum amount of water that need to be in our streams or particular reach of our streams in order to protect all of the things that we're talking about today, right? Lo'ikalo cultivation, our native stream animals, our loko iakalo, all of those things. So IIFSs to looking at understanding designation and water use permitting, which is something that we have been honored to do for the last several years in Maui Komohana in partnership with lots of different community groups who are on the ground there. And and I guess as an initial example, in 2019 and 2020, our clinic partnered with the Waiʻoli Valley Tarahui, and I think I see Dominique. So our people are everywhere that we were providing help with. But we worked with a coalition of small family farmers who had been they actually take care of a significant portion of the lo'ikalo that's cultivated in Waiʻoli Valley, which feeds most of us, and especially people who get poi from Waipa. This is very important to you. But who help to really feed our communities and provide poi and poi cheesecake and all of the important things. But as a result of the climate disaster and significant flooding that we had there in 2018, these farmers who had been caring for this ʻāina since time immemorial, the lo'i that were dated to the 15th century, all of a sudden needed to get the palapala to show that they could use this manawai, which is the traditional irrigation system where the water comes off of the river into the lo'ikalo. And so part of the work that our clinic did was help to jump through the legal loopholes, the various permitting and other things that were necessary in order to get them this palapala. So we got them first a 55-year easement and then later perpetual easement, which is wonderful and something that we celebrate, but is also ironic and kind of ridiculous that when you have the same families who have been stewarding these resources for so many generations, that especially in the wake of the climate disasters that we're dealing with across our Paʻāina, whether we're talking about wildfires or flooding, that in order just to continue to practice our culture, we need to do all of these things, which is part of what our clinic provides. So we have done a range of stuff, more traditional ʻāinahoʻi type of things like the perpetual easement. We're honored to partner now with community groups who are looking to reclaim paper title to ʻāina that their ohana had traditionally stewarded for many, many years, but is now held by a former plantation interest. And so that's a process that we're currently working on now. But I'd hazard to say that, all of the work that we've done, I mean, whether it's more typical ʻāinahoʻi type stuff like perpetual easements or actually looking at the return of paper title and ʻāina to communities, all of the work that we've done, including the pure water work, is all ʻāinahoʻi. Because to me, if we don't have the vai that Kamana talked about earlier, right, in order to make our ʻāina rich and to be able to support the practices that we all need to survive, then our culture is empty. So we've been honored to be able to do this work, and we continue to do it today. And Mahina has played a very important role both in Waiʻoli and since. So our fellows are everywhere.
Okay, mahalo for that, Kapua. And I'm going to turn it back to Rayna now. So can you tell us about a recent project that illustrates the full arc of this work, from community vision to closing, or some other kind of process? I'm thinking about places like ʻāinahoʻi or Maunawili. What does that process look like on the ground?
So ʻāinahoʻi and Maunawili, Maunawili is, 1,083 acres in Maunawili in Kailua that were threatened with subdivision. And the Hui Maunawili Kawainui banded together to fight against the subdivision. It's a coalition of, about a dozen Native Hawaiian and environmental nonprofits, as well as generational residents and descendants of this ʻāina. And because they were so good at what they did, right, what I described earlier, Trust for Public Land was invited in to see if we could broker basically acquisition of this. If you can imagine over 1,000 acres in Kailua that could be protected, right? Highly gentrified Kailua that a lot of people don't associate with Hawaiians or Hawaiian culture. And all of our incredible partners on the ground are proving that wrong and helping to re-educate the community about the true history of these places. And originally, the whole 1,083 acres was going to go to the state. So we do partner with the state DLNR to help them acquire land. We partner with OHA as well. All of the lands that Chair Kahele mentioned, while Keleopuna, the first time that ceded lands was ever returned to a Hawaiian entity, was Trust for Public Lands partnership with them. Kukani Loko, Waimea Valley, all of those were in partnership with OHA. This was way before my time. And so after more meetings and discussions, they wanted to do a land swap initially. The community and Ho'okuaina and Ka'olua Kalana, who I think Noe mentioned earlier, are doing incredible work of stewardship, of reviving culture and practice in Kailua. And we were they were looking and saying, okay, well, some of these lands are zoned ag too. And if you look at the infrastructure that's there in terms of Owai, historic lo'i, heiau, burials, alanui, all of these things, should it be in the hands of DLNR or should it be in the hands of these stewards? And so we figured out, after many conversations, a project structure where 116 acres is going to be returned to Ho'okuaina, and about 60 acres is going to be returned to Ka'ulua Kalana for ownership and stewardship. The remaining 900 or so acres, which includes the golf course, which has about 16 years left on its lease, will go to DLNR. But DLNR is committed to and already has a revocable permit with a Native Hawaiian nonprofit to help with stewardship, because all of those lands, if you've hiked Mauna Willie Trail, which has been closed basically since COVID, is an incredible agricultural complex that primarily has been used for recreational purposes, right? I mean, I hiked Mauna Willie Trail my whole childhood, never knew what was underneath. And so even under state ownership, there is this vision for co-management with community, Native Hawaiian community. And so we needed to raise over $30 million to make this project happen. You know, it's very hard to do this work in the environment we're in, where, you know, ʻāina is real estate. In Kailua and in so many places across Hawaii, it's expensive. So land back in this context, and like we said, there's so many other ways you can do land back. In this context is very expensive. So we had to seek a bunch of different federal funding sources, including Forest Legacy, including Department of Defense funds through REPI, our State Legacy Land Conservation Fund, and our City of Honolulu Clean Water and Natural Lands Fund. So all of these different, that's kind of the big part of our job, is putting that funding piece together. Really, the community's vision is that is to revive these lands as ʻāina momona so it can feed again. Not in a too distant past. There was active agriculture happening on these lands. It was kalo for, you know, many generations, and then rice, and then used for grazing, for ranching. But the nonprofits we're working with already have rights of entry and leases over these lands. They've already cleared a lot of invasive forest and already are beginning to replant natives. Ho'okuaina just got their water permit approved by the Water Commission. So stuff is already happening, even though we have not yet closed. But we are hoping we will close within the next 6 months or so. So it's go time right now, but it's really all thanks to the community and these incredible leaders that have led the way.
Awesome. That's amazing. Okay, so now that we have kind of a lay of the land and all the fabulous things you guys are working on, I want to kind of move from these tools that we're talking about to the tension in using those tools. So in some way, each of you works within Western property law every day, right? The appraisals, the leases, the easements. And yet the goal of this work is something that Western property law was never designed to protect, which is a relationship between people and ʻāina that isn't exactly reducible to ownership. So how do you hold those two things at once? Does the law kind of bend towards that vision, or do you find that you bend towards the law? And I'm sure this is community and place specific, right? And this is open for everyone. Whoever wants to jump in.
And everyone's looking at me, nothing like being voluntold. This is a really important question, and I think one that's made so much easier to answer thanks to the excellent kind of context that we had at the beginning of our session by Dr. Beamer, right? There is tremendous tension between Western property concepts and ʻōiwi values. But here, we're incredibly lucky, because in Hawaii, we have a hybridized system of private property that was created precisely as Dr. Beamer explained, and for more information, you can read his book, No Mako Kamana. It spells it all out very clearly. But you know, this system was created by Kauikeaoli during our sovereign kingdom for Native people based on Native values, like Aloha ʻāina. And he walked us through this morning. It's really, you know, straightforward, the 1839 and 1840, kumukanawai. So here we have these foundational, what we call for those in Western property law, you know, what can be called legal precepts, right? And so whereas in other places in America or they'd look to Blackstonian concepts, here we look to Aloha ʻāina. We look to the values that are kupuna held sacred. And that's what continues to guide us forward. Now, while we're lucky that we have this kind of as an outline, these cultural values and these precepts, and they are an important foundation, right? ʻāinahoʻi keia, as he explained at the beginning. What we also know is that the Western notions of private property are not universally applicable in Hawaii. So things are just different here because everything is subject to, right, the koinai ke kuleana o na Kānaka. Everything is subject to the rights of native tenants. But because our foundation is fundamentally indigenous, our culture, our customs, our values, our traditions pervade. And these are the traditional notions of stewardship as opposed to ownership. And there are many people who are working to reframe and to reclaim that, because that's, I think, where we see the struggle, right, where the rubber meets the road, that tension between law, land, and justice, because we haven't seen that, not just in Lahaina, but in many other places too, right? Because the truth of the matter is that our property system has not operated for many years in the hybridized way that it was designed. I mean, we heard at the beginning, right, the 3,000 or so transfers that happened at the beginning, and that still happened for many years after that, right? So the systems of power and privilege played a tremendous role in Hawaii and actually used these Western notions of private property to try and keep Kānaka in their place and separate us from land, because it's really that pilina, I think, that feeds us and guides us forward. So coming full circle, I mean, I think the important part of what we need to do is reclaim that. Yes, there's a tension between Western notions and OEV values, but here we have our own system. And so that's part of what we need to do, is we really need to reclaim and reassert that. But feel free to chime in, please.
Hello. Okay. I'm just going to be really honest. In the beginning of our journey building the Lahaina Community Land Trust, we found ourselves doing a lot of code switching. Like in some rooms, they want to talk about affordable housing. They do not want to talk about land back, right? And so we were doing a lot of that for the first year or so. Now I and the rest of the group are much more comfortable saying in big rooms that we are using county affordable housing funds to buy land out of capitalism and put Hawaiians and generational Lahaina people in the front of the line. You know, but it took us a minute. So we also are being comfortable with those same people in the room. We're getting county funding to buy land in a TMK system that we don't recognize. And I'm using donor money to pay off banks to get people out of a mortgage system that I don't feel is legitimate. Like, we're getting comfortable saying those things. We also had to get comfortable with understanding that that takes a lot of money. Like, the numbers that we are dealing with in Lahaina are something that I was not comfortable with a few years ago. And we're working in the, hundreds of millions right now. But together, we understood that we can fight, we can try to policy our way out of these systems that are harming everybody, or we can just buy our way out, and that's almost easier. Like in some situations, $200 million to buy a large percentage of Lahaina out of this capitalistic hellscape that we're all being forced to live in, into liberation, feels like kind of a steal, So anyways, yeah, that's been our evolution thus far.
Rayna, do you want to jump in there? Or? No. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll keep it on Autumn for a second, and let's talk about governance. Because this is where the rubber hits the road too, and where a lot of community land efforts either thrive or fracture. So can you tell us what structures the Land Trust has put in place to ensure genuine collective decision-making? Are there dispute resolution mechanisms? Can you walk us through how that operates in practice?
Yes, the first thing I'm going to say is from day one, like the first 2 hours of this conversation on that tailgate about we're going to build a community land trust and buy Lahaina back, we went straight to governance. That was the first thing we talked about. Like, what if we could build a land ownership organization that actually prioritizes pilina and history between Kānaka and ʻāina, and can we make kiaʻi credits? Like, if you're involved in your community, if you show up at the water hearing, you get like an extra point in the housing lottery. You're like, how can, that was real. That was the first few hours of this conversation. And because of the nature of our organization and that the people that need to be involved in governance are also like trying to build their house right now, it's like a hierarchy of needs. We kind of got a pass from the community to just like build the scaffolding and hold it until folks are home and back in community and have the breathing space to decide on more longer term governance. What we did, and that's again because we have this generational infrastructure of trust that the staff and the board have been cultivating for years. If you look, there's an organization called the Grounded Solutions Network on the continent, and they're kind of a repository for this American how to buy land out of this system. They've got like ground leases and bylaws and deed restrictions that have zero reference to Hawaii in them, but they're very, very useful. And the going thing for community land trusts across the continent, and there's to be this like tripartite board, like homeowners should make up a third of it, stakeholders should make up a third of it, the community should make up a third of it. We threw that out because most of you in this room are familiar with how every board and commission that's meant to regulate things has been hijacked by opposing forces. So we decided to throw that out and to take 5, 8, 10 years to collectively build out what this governance structure looks like. But I will say that first 2 hours of conversations that we had about what governance is going to look like is our North Star. Like every transaction we make, every contract we write up, every funding mechanism or thing that's our North Star, and we're just going to get there together. So let's have this conversation again in 5 years as Molokai is having the same conversations, Lahaina is having, we're going to figure this out. But the thing is trust and a shared set of values, I think, and that's going to get us there, I feel like.
Okay, let's talk about for Rayna. So one of the least discussed but most consequential parts of land acquisition is the appraisal process. Super fun. Can you pull back the curtain on that a little bit? Kind of where does the tension arise between appraised value and a community's vision for lands? And how do you navigate that when you're working with parties who might have different interests?
Yeah, so appraisals, I mean, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but they look at ʻāina as property. And the core question when you're asking an appraiser to value property that they have to answer is what is the highest and best use of this property? And in a capitalist system, the highest and best use is always how much value can you extract, right? Extract from this property that can be bought and sold, right? ʻāina is a set of relationships between people and place. And so obviously there's some very core tensions between those two worldviews. And to talk about something like concrete, right? Like in a current appraisal that we were just working on with the city and county of Honolulu and one of our partners, a lot of our ʻāina-based partners they're solving like the most pressing crises of our time: climate change, water security, food sovereignty, green workforce development, local sustainable economies. And they, traditionally conservation sees, I guess Western conservation is about, we have to protect land from people because people harm land. That's the assumption, right? And of course that's the assumption when your only purpose is to extract as much as you can from a piece of property, right? But obviously here that it's different. And so our partners really understand that in order for land to be ʻāina momona again, you have to live on it. And most people, when they think of conservation, they think, oh, conservation and housing are at odds. Conservation and development are at odds. And really, we need to push, in a way, decolonize conservation so that these conservation easements, these deed restrictions, these things that we're permanently putting on ʻāina that our partners are going to have to abide by for, forevermore, reflect their worldview. And that means they should have a right to develop it, but on their terms, right? And so they're saying, for this ʻāina to be momona, we need to live here. And so our partners in a current project are saying, we want to reserve the opportunity to build 20 houses on this land, which probably in a conservation easement in Hawaii is maybe like unheard of. And so it puts government agencies into a panic. It puts appraisers into a panic. They're like, oh, you're reserving all these development rights. So how are we now going to value what you're giving up? You're not giving up much. And so it's our job to really educate them about what this means. This is not housing in a sense of just living there. And so the way that we define it in the conservation easement is this is housing for stewardship. And when you define the purpose, there's a purpose section in a conservation easement. What are the conservation values you're trying to protect? You're trying to protect traditional native customary rights. You're trying to protect agriculture. You're trying to protect cultural and historic sites. How are you going to do that? And everyone we know that is genius says, well, you have to work ʻāina. You want to protect an ʻauai, you don't fence it off and turn it into a park or a preserve. You have to use it and actively steward it. And so the way that you define housing is really, I think, an attempt to codify this concept of kuleana, right? Like, what is your relationship? Why do you get to live here? Oh, because I take care, and I'm growing food, and I'm stewarding this vai. And so the way that an appraiser has to look at it is, okay, like, I can't compare the housing that these guys are reserving for this property to housing on the open market, where some person can just come and buy a property in Hawaii and use it as their playground and come for a month and leave the rest of the time. There's no sense of kuleana in that type of housing. And so a lot of it is really like a culture shift and educating our government partners, people in real estate to think differently. So we need people that understand these values in all of these spaces. I didn't pay attention to property law when I was in law school because I was like, yeah, like, but then in the real world, it's like, okay, we got to figure out how to balance these things, right? Which is what speaks to your question earlier, is like, how do we achieve these things through the limited tools we have? And it really is about being creative, and to be honest, it's a lot of advocacy and education.
Awesome. So to zoom out a bit from the nitty-gritty of those processes, I want to talk about the bigger picture a little bit. So for Kapua, you've spent years in court fighting to put water back in streams that plantations ran dry for over a century. So I want to ask you something that sounds simple but isn't. So when we say land back, what are we actually getting back? What does justice look like? And should a party that profited from that extraction bear any responsibility for making it whole again?
Yes. Another, that was easy, I'm done. No, I think that's, another really incisive question and a really important one for us to grapple with. I mean, honestly, in the work that our clinic has been doing now in Maui for, the past 3 or 4 years now, and looking at recovery, especially in the wake of the fires, but really this resonates with other communities throughout our Paeaina. When we're living with a legacy of 200 years of colonialism. So if we're just being real, our resources are all bus up. in a legal sense. There, you know, right, we're dealing, because of what happened, people being removed from the land, there have been lots of different efforts, but we're talking about massive stream diversions, we're talking about plantation agriculture, we're talking about the military-industrial complex, and not just the live fire training that it's doing, but the pollution that's wrought, you know, across the Paʻaina. So these are like super real and heavy and sometimes unsolvable kuleana that our communities are basically being asked to solve. There are these problems, and the community is stepping up. So when we're looking at ʻāinahoʻi, and we need to be real about what condition our ʻāina's in, whether we're talking about kahoʻolave, I mean, and we look at the tremendous resources that were invested there over many, many years. And, you know, while I'm grateful for the amazing work that Protect Kahoʻolave Ohana in particular has done, like, I'm sorry, the military needs to do more to clean up over there. And there's also a lot of work that cannot be undone. If we look at the pollution at Kapua and many other areas, don't know how they're gonna get the PFAS out of the water, frankly. And so when we're looking at ʻāinahoʻi, we need to be real about what that means for the community groups that are taking on this kuleana, that really, the ʻāinahoʻi, for me, shouldn't be the goal. That's just like the next step, because it's when that happens that then the real work begins. And so there needs to be, I mean, Rayna's talked a lot about the tremendous work that TPL, and I see Leah Hong trying to hide in the back because that's how she rolls. But, you know, the tremendous work that TPL and other folks have been doing for a long time to raise money for this, but it's not just about buying it back. We really need to look at the capacity building and the base building that needs to happen, not just on the ʻāina, but also in the organizations that are working to awamo this kuleana. So the professional development that needs to happen, the services, you know, do they need nonprofits, 501c3s? It's something our clinic has been helping to work with, or maybe they need an LLC, because depending upon the kind of work that needs to be done, that's not sufficient. So I just encourage us to be very expansive about what it means when we're looking at ʻāinahoʻi and looking at how we set this process and our community groups up for success. So throughout the entire spectrum, because this work, you know, 200 years, folks jammed up a lot, and it's gonna take, you know, that much time for us to rebuild back all that pilina for the places where we haven't been able to cultivate them. And of course, the people who have profited from the destruction need to pay. I mean, for me, ultimately, the goal is ho'oponopono, and so if we're looking at how do we make this pono, we need to consider all of that, the financial resources, the genuine apologies, and the work that needs to happen. And for me, part of that means, and one of the resources that we've been using with the clinic is looking at right relations, right? How do we make things pono again? And so a lot of times folks are so excited, oh, look, we're gonna get the ʻāina back at, you know, real property tax assessment value, which is so much lower than if we sold it at market. Hey, you know what? Maybe you need to just give it back, because for the last 200 years, you've been profiting off of the water that you've been selling from the system. So I think we need to look very holistically and meaningfully about what it's going to take to make things pono.
Yes, okay, speaking of being real and being expansive at the same time, I want to turn it back to Autumn for a second. And you know, I'm so inspired by what Lahaina Community Land Trust is doing, what a bunch of groups are doing. Kipuka Kuleana and Kauai, folks in Molokai are doing awesome work. So, in your experience with the Land Trust, what can you tell us about, you know, what to do, even what not to do for other communities facing the same threats of speculator-driven displacement after disaster, or even just, you know, like how Kumukamana was talking about before with all these tech billionaires buying up ʻāina. How can we take these models to scale?
Well, okay, so before the fire, I spent a decade and a bit in housing policy. I was trying to policy our way out of this mess. I was trying to convince the county and the state to recognize that just reserving units of housing for residents is not enough, because you can just move here yesterday and become a resident. Like, you know, I actually wish that I had freed my brain of that path and gotten into just like, let's just do what we got to do to get it back and be the landowner so we don't have to ask anybody. I wish I had done that 10 years ago. It is what it is. So what I would say to other people is the fire in Lahaina is what put everything right in front of our face. Like the thing that's happening in everybody's neighborhood across Hawaii was already happening in Lahaina, but then the whole thing burned down and it was about to be a literal fire sale. But you don't have to wait for that. You know, you guys in each of your neighborhoods, if you've been doing activism or organizing or ʻāina work, you already have the same relational infrastructure that we had in Lahaina that allowed us to build the land trust. So don't wait, because your friends and family who are like on the brink of being pushed out because they can't afford it, all they need is to hui up and buy their lands back. It's not easy. I'm not trying to oversimplify it. And the price tag is really high, but just to like give you an example, the county itself, they have this affordable housing fund that they take a portion of taxes and put it into a fund that they're supposed to like make affordable housing. The county spent more than $260 million over the last 10 or 12 years, and we have almost nothing to show for it. There are no housing reserved for Kānaka. There's nothing. You know, there's low-income rentals that are going to be gone into the market in some years, or single-family homes that are already gone to the market for some years. So for that same amount of money, we can protect 20% of Lahaina forever and put it into community hands. So it's not that the resources aren't there. We've had, myself included, kind of a crisis of imagination about like how far outside the system we can use those resources to go. You know what I'm saying? So that's the first thing. And I mentioned resources. There's the Grounded Solutions Network is a really good place to start for the verbiage and the paperwork. And they even have like, if you're going to start a land trust, here's a sample budget. You know, like all those things. We became a member of the Northwest Community Land Trust Coalition, who actually amended their bylaws to bring Hawaii into their hui. And the thing I'm learning about land trust people is they're very collective beings by default. You know, they really understand that problems that we can't solve by ourselves, even if it's just a money problem, we can solve together. So the last thing I'll say is Lahaina was able to move as fast as it did, not because we're geniuses, but because people from across the Paʻāina and across the continent heard that we wanted to start a land trust and they swooped in to help us. When LA burned, not very long ago, including Altadena, which I'm learning more about every day and what a special community that was, we paid it forward. We gave them all of our paperwork, all of our slide decks, all of our financial models, everything. So they're building a land trust in their community after the fire. And so if you guys, if anyone in the community is looking at this as a potential tool to protect your community, there is support. You do not have to start from zero. And we've committed for all of our documents to be open source. Like just take our logo off and put your logo on top and use it if you like, kind of a thing, you know? And that support exists everywhere.
So to close this out before turning to Q&A, I'm going to ask one last question, if everybody wants to respond to it. So because we have so many brilliant, committed people in this room today, if you can point the researchers, the policymakers, and students in this room, either or, in a direction that could push this movement forward, you know, this could be a legal reform, a research gap, one structural change that would make the biggest practical difference for families and communities trying to hold on to land or to reclaim land, what would that be?
God, there's so many. What's on my wish list? Well, number one is a land action fund. We need like millions of dollars so that we can do this work, because we can't compete in the current market, right? There's overseas buyers that are buying land, sight unseen, cash, 30 days close. We cannot do that. So we need a pool of funding where we can borrow and pay back so that we can keep up, because we're losing more ʻāina every day than we can actually buy back. I think the other thing that's sort of alive right now because it's a concrete thing you can do is Kua and Huimaka Ainana Omakana, along with many other incredible community leaders, are advancing a co-management and co-stewardship bills in the legislature. TPL in our long history has worked to protect over 79,000 acres across the ʻāina. The state, DLNR, owns what? I'm gonna get this wrong, 1.5 million acres, about a quarter of the land in Hawaii. So if we're gonna make any forward progress in ʻāinahoʻi, there needs to be a mechanism for communities who are already partnering with the state in so many different forms. They have concessions agreements, they have rights of revocable permits, they have rights of entry, they have all these 10 million different agreements, but there is no one way for communities to manage and steward state land at a local level, and this is really the way, and there's been a lot of smart people that have been working on it. I can't give you the bill numbers, but I'm sure there's people in the room that know the bill numbers, but go and support that effort, because that is one concrete way that communities can govern their lands and waters.
This is like, you know, in the interim until such a time when we get all of it back. I think the state and the county have taken an overly conservative interpretation of fair housing law to the point, like it's causing great harm to the people of this place because they have chosen to be overly conservative. Fair housing law does not mean that you cannot put long-term residents ahead of people who moved here last week. That is not what it means. But that's what our Attorney General and our legislature and everybody will die on the Hill about, and they'll say the best we can do is do a lottery for residents, everyone's treated the same. That is not what fair housing law says. So for the land trust, for example, we have a lottery where your household gets picked. We pick like 10 different households, and the household with the most years lived in the West Maui community area gets to the front of the line. We have housing that is reserved for kumu in the Kaiapuni school. We have housing that is reserved for lo'ikalo practitioners. We have housing that is reserved for, you know what I mean? You can do that legally. Those are legally protected people. So I would, to anyone that's listening who's making this policy, housing that is being built as affordable, especially with public funds, needs to use those same selection frameworks to make sure that the people that this community needs to stay get in those units, you know?
And my reform is a really simple one. I think it's really for our decision makers because the community all gets it. But it's a mental reform. Everybody needs to read Kamana's book and understand really where we are in Hawaii and why things are different. People forget that here in Hawaii, we're unique. We have a unique system of laws and cultures and values, and that should be the foundation, and that needs to drive decision making. That's my manalo.
Awesome. Mahalo for all of the work you folks are doing and sharing your manao today. And we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Yes, how about a mahalo again for this fantastic panel. Super innovative, fascinating solutions. That's one thing in a time of crisis and extreme oppression, fascism. We get this amazing creativity, and these wahine are a great example of that. So how about a couple of questions we can take from anyone have a dying, or not dying, urgent, critical, thoughtful question that we might want to ask? Okay, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for this terrific panel. My question is one based on having read the newspaper for the last few days and seen articles about a fellow identified as a Japanese billionaire who has a plan. Could you comment on that?
I'm might have some mana'o on that. Thank you for that excellent question. If I'm understanding you correctly, there has been, and for folks who, in fact, there's an article in the newspaper today, but there have been questions about TY Corporation, which is a golf course that is located in Maui Komohana, out near Kapalua, and whoever was responsible for submitting a permit application for them the day before the Lahaina fires screwed up. And so they neglected to file a permit application. But former GLNR and Water Commission Chair Don Chang has been allowing them to pump drinking water for their golf course, a significant amount of water, even though Lahaina is facing the most severe drought, I think, in not even recent memory, like in recorded history, perhaps. So the issue is that there's a significant conflict between whether or not this golf course should be able to use drinking water for turf irrigation, or whether it needs to comply with the law. So as part of, and interestingly, I want to give some props to the interim Department of Land and Natural Resources Chair, Kānaka Maoli, because the community members that we work with in our clinic, Namamolo Ho'aino Honokohau, and many of the other community members who have been playing by the rules for the past 3 years were furious, continue to be furious about how this is taking place. And so they all showed up at the Water Commission last week, Tuesday, and demanded that the chair take action. And although the commission didn't vote at last Tuesday's meeting, he did send, the interim chair sent a letter on Monday, which I read as saying the golf course is no longer able to continue illegally pumping groundwater. But the golf course very generously, I think, in a bid to ask people to allow it to continue illegally pumping groundwater, put on a big dog and pony show at the Water Commission last week and offered to spend, I don't know, $20, $40 million to do a whole bunch of infrastructure changes, some of which I think would be helpful for the larger community, but it wasn't just out of the goodness of its heart. It's because they wanted to continue using drinking water to keep the golf course green in the 3 to 5 years that it would take them to implement some of the changes that they're proposing. So if that's the deal that you were asking about, I think it's, at least the community members that we have been working with continue to express significant skepticism and concern about what's being proposed. While they appreciate the sentiment, much of, I think it lacks, those people who are familiar with the issues find it not to be, more work needs to be done. And I think the amount of time that it would take in order to make that happen will maybe beneficial over the long run. I think the community is not willing to trade the drinking water in the interim, and even if it was, it couldn't do that legally. So I hope that answers your question, but happy to talk more about it during the break. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Kapua. We have another question here from Huli.
Mahalo to you folks for this incredible panel. I'm really inspired by the different ways you folks are getting creative at fucking with empire. And we just heard another really great panel before yours in thinking about the Ali'i Trust and quasi-state institutions and the work that they're doing. I'm curious from your point of view, because I imagine that there's some collaboration already happening, perhaps other collaboration that needs to happen in the future. How do you guys see your work in relationship to what seems to me is there are some major shifts happening, at least in the leadership in these trusts. Never in, I'm not that old, but never in my life did I think that I would hear a trustee of Kamehameha Schools saying the kinds of things that Noelani is saying and doing the kind of work that she's doing, or hearing someone from OHA say the kinds of things that Kai is saying, or DH, all of that. So what does this movement for ʻāinahoʻi take place in different rooms and in different ways, and like a nod, like good job what you're doing over there, or is there more important collaboration that needs to happen? And is there a way that the community, as in community management and the lahui, that can push our institutions to support some of our grassroots mobilizations that's happening that you folks represent? So that's my question.
I just want to call out KS for a second. in a good way, because Noe, you remember this. It was like, I don't even know, it was like weeks after the fire, and the big leadership team, including Jack Wong and Noe and a bunch of other people, came and sat under the tent in the Pili where we were distributing things, and they were like, what do you guys need, you know? And I think at the time the expectation was like we were gonna say something like Starlink or a solar, you know, I don't know, something like that. And we were like, well, we're gonna start a community land trust, and we're gonna buy back a large portion of Lahaina, and we need your help. And I remember the face that a lot of people made, like, oh, that's complicated. And then that team has really stuck with us and never really doubted our ability as a community to pull this off, while some funders, including Hawaii Community Foundation, did doubt us and did question our ability and our role, and even if we should be, do we belong in this space? And so that support alone, talking us up in rooms that we're not in, talking to the banks and like telling them, no, these guys are good investments, has been major. So we have a really good relationship with them right now, and I hope.
Can I just add one thing? And the fact that KS just snapped up a whole, like all of the land that Peter Martin was holding, I think is a huge, huge ʻāinahoʻi effort for the Lahui. Yeah. That makes the work that our clinic is doing on behalf of the community members, because I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to work together on the water use permitting issue. No, I mean, but in all seriousness, right, Kamehameha has totally different values and commitments, and we are its beneficiaries. It paid for me to go to law school. So, you know, but in all seriousness, I mean, we would way rather be working with Kamehameha schools than Peter Martin. And so I'm a kind of, you know, by any means necessary kind of gal. And I think I'm grateful that Kamehameha, with all of its capacity, is being expansive in how it supports ʻāinahoʻi, including efforts like that and just like buying the land back so that we can do other things. But I interrupted Autumn, sorry. But I guess to answer the rest of Hiolia's, of course, asked a very big question. I think there's so much is happening, and I'm grateful for the forward movement that we're hearing about here, but also that's happening in lots of other spaces that we're not hearing about. And in my old age, I mean, just at Kahuliao, we partner with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and with OHA in supporting the provision of direct legal services to Hawaiian communities. So they pay to help us they support fellows so that we can provide free legal help to people. And I think that's huge. While also training students to build the base of, you know, Lahui lawyers who are available to do this work. So we are seeing definite gains, but way more work needs to be done, and there needs to be more coordination, more money raised, like just so many million things that we could talk about. So yes, these are long conversations to be had during the Muliwai Mixer, I think.
Yes, stay for the Muliwai Mixer. We're about getting to lunch. Sorry, the sandwich deliveries went a little late, so I let Q&A go long. So we got 200, 3/4 of turkey, 1/4 veggie. I don't know. There's sandwiches down there. They're not all there. I can't do the math right now. Excuse me. But I'm going to give probably our last question. You had your hand up first, so I'll give it.
Mahalo. My name's Emily. I'm visiting from Kauai. And we are part of a Kalu Kalu at 1624 is a cooperative hub that is, we have a vision that's mixed use, like commercial housing potentially, and we're working on purchasing it to put into a trust. And I'm curious from a legal perspective if it has a mixed use in that case, if there's any direction or any resources you could point to, because we're on the formation side of it legally.
I just want to call a thing out that I forgot to do in the beginning. The Lahaina Community Land Trust has trust in the name, but we are not a trust in the same way that all the other trusts are. We're a 501c3 that owns land. So if you're a trust with trustees and all these other, or you have easements, those rules are a little bit more defined. We chose to be a 501c3 that owns land because we're just going to buy the land and we'll build a mixed use development just like a regular developer, but we get to set the values around that. So yeah, I just wanted to call that out because even high-level attorneys will ask us, the title company will ask us for our trust documents during a transaction. We're like, no, we're just a 501c3 that owns land. So
Then you say, trust me. Sorry, it's my beamerness. I can't get away from opportunity for a lame joke. Excuse me. Well, how about actually we'll have one more question from Kavelau, and then we'll transition into lunch. If there aren't enough sandwiches, Timmy T's is supposed to be back on its way. I really apologize. Everybody email Timmy T's. Tell them to get our lunch on time next time, but they better be good turkeys and veggies. So here you go, Kavelau.
Aloha mai kako. Thank you so much. The brilliance on this stage just blows me away. Thank you. I actually am teaching a pilot course on community land trust right now, and I'm not expert in what you guys know, obviously, but we're using case studies to just sort of think about, to dream the dream, right? To help students actually think proactively about what we can do now before we get independence back and all of that. And so I'm just gonna say it. I hope that all of you on the stage would be willing to speak to my class, because I think they're getting tired of hearing my voice, first of all. But seriously, like I feel like this is a really interesting. We owe it to ourselves to at least continue to push forward and examine what this vehicle can help us with. And I think that all of you on the stage have really shown that push to sort of test the limits and be creative and to do all of this in a way to build up generational residence and the lahui. So that was just a word of warning. I'll be emailing all of you. Mahalo nui.
Okay, yes, how about a hand? Amazing panel.